Lecture 6, Representational Democracies Compared. In the previous lectures, we discussed a variety of forms of government, including direct democracy, representational democracy, monarchical, or rule by one. In this lecture, we will compare different types of representational democracy, which in a rough way can be broken into presidential systems, epitomized by the US, and the more common parliamentary system, exemplified by Britain. To understand with clarity the differences between these two systems and the hybrids that stand between the two, we will focus our attention on political models in the US, Britain, France, Germany, and Israel. The US presidential system: presidential, bicameral, federal, and constitutional. In the US presidential system, the elected president as head of government is also head of state. In accordance with the U.S. Constitution's system of checks and balances, the president's executive power is, generally speaking, distinct from the legislative power and judicial power. The president's executive power is ideally limited to making decisions in accordance with laws. Legislative power, in contrast, primarily deals with making laws, while judicial power judges laws and actions. Unlike federal judges, who are in office indefinitely to depoliticize their office, those elected to legislative offices and to the office of the president have fixed terms. The president, after being indirectly democratically elected by the Electoral College for a 4-year term, can only be re-elected for a second term and not for a third as stated in the 22nd Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. The president can be legally dismissed only by impeachment and resignation. He cannot be dismissed simply because a majority of people lack confidence in him or do not like him, or do not like his style of leadership. The U.S. legislative branch, or U.S. House of Congress, is divided into a Senate, the upper house, and a House of Representatives, the lower house. Unlike the president, representatives in these two houses are directly elected by the people. Senators who represent their states are elected, or in case of a vacancy, appointed by a governor to serve for 6 years. Members of the House of Representatives only serve 2 years and represent a district within their states. Each of the 50 states of the U.S. is entitled to 2 senators, and every state is guaranteed to have 1 member in the House of Representatives. Since after the number 1 representation in the House of Representatives is determined by a state's population. A state such as California has many representatives, while the small state of Vermont only has 1 representative. The leader of the House of Representatives is called the Speaker of the House, who is followed by a majority leader and a minority leader. The majority power that the House of Representatives has is to pass federal legislation. The major power that the House of Representatives has is to pass federal legislation that, due to the supremacy clause discussed in a previous lecture, every state must follow. Prior to becoming laws, bills that are passed by the House of Representatives must be passed by the Senate and approved by the U.S. President. The leader in the Senate is, ex officio, the Vice President of the U.S. Below him is the President pro tempore, who presides when the Vice President is absent. When presiding as officer of the Senate, the Vice President may only vote to break a tie. The President of the Senate is followed by the majority and minority leaders. Major powers of the Senate include passing bills, consenting to treaties, and confirming appointments. How the President and the 2 houses of Congress relate to one another is evident in the passing of a bill. A bill is first introduced in either chamber of Congress. If passed in one chamber of Congress, unless the other chamber already has a similar measure under consideration, it is then sent to the other chamber, House of Representatives or Senate. If either chamber does not pass the bill, it dies. If the House and Senate pass the same bill, then it is sent to the President. If the House and Senate pass different bills, they are sent to the U.S. Congressional Conference Committee before being finally sent to the President. The British parliamentary system: parliamentary, bicameral, unitary, and non-constitutional. The British parliamentary system differs in many ways from the US presidential system. In Britain, the head of the political system is shared by the Queen as the symbolic head of the state, and by the Prime Minister as head of government. After a general election for a specific party, the leader of the most popular party becomes the Prime Minister, who then forms a cabinet. Unlike the US president, the Prime Minister may stay in office until he or she either resigns after a vote of no confidence by the Parliament, or if a general election determines that another party is to be the majority party. For example, Margaret Thatcher was able to stay in office from 1979 to 1990. One way she managed to retain power for so long was by exercising her right to call for an early general election vote before her term of 5 years was up. She called for early general election votes when she was confident her popularity rating was high. Along with the executive branch is a legislative branch consisting of the House of Lords, the upper house, and the House of Commons, the lower house. As the names indicate, the House of Lords was originally intended to represent the interests of the aristocratic class, while the House of Commons was intended to represent the interests of everyone else. In the parliamentary system, the executive branch and the legislative branch are fused, since when people vote for the legislative branch, they are, at the same time, electing the executive power. This fusion influences members in the various competing parties to be less defined by how they differ from other members in their party, while being more defined by party platform. Parties therefore tend to vote as a bloc, more than in the US, where there are greater distinctions between governmental branches. The US system, consequently, encourages greater individualism within parties. Another major difference between the US system of governance and the British system is that, unlike the US with its formally written constitution, in effect since 1789, the British system lacks a formal constitution. Instead, the British have an uncodified or unwritten constitution that is based on written documents, historical precedent, statutes, previous court judgments, treaties, authoritative works, parliamentary conventions. The French hybrid system: parliamentary, strong presidential, unitary, bicameral, and constitutional. France's constitutional democratic government is a mixture of both the US presidential system and the British parliamentary system. In the French hybrid system, the president is the head of state and the prime minister is the head of government. Like the US, the president is democratically elected by the people, but without relying on an electoral college. The term is for 5 years, renewable only once. Unlike the British Queen, the French president, as head of state, does not merely have a symbolic role. Instead, he has greater power than the head of government, who is the prime minister. This is evident in the presidential power, as head of state, to appoint and dismiss the prime minister. The French legislative power is primarily held by the French Parliament, which is divided into a Senate, the upper house, that is indirectly elected by elected officials, and the National Assembly, the lower house, that is popularly elected. The President of France presides over the Senate and has the power to dissolve the Assembly. As is evident, France places great power into its executive head, the President. This is because, under the Fourth Republic, lasted from 1943 to 1958, France underwent great political instability, which many blamed on its weak executive office. Some governments during this time only lasted around 6 months. Upon the introduction of a fifth and current constitution in 1958, France strengthened the office of the president with the hope of encouraging greater political stability. Germany: parliamentary, federal, bicameral, and constitutional. Prior to 1989, the Federal Republic of Germany had 10 states plus West Berlin. In 1990, when East Germany combined with West Germany, 6 new states were added to the federal system, bringing the total to 16. Unlike France, Germany, out of fear of an over-centralized power in one executive, has retained significant power in each of its 16 states. Like France and England, Germany also has 2 people share in the chief executive power. The president serves as mostly a symbolic head of state, while the chancellor serves as the head of government. The chancellor is the leader of the party that holds the majority of seats in the Bundestag. The German legislative branch is divided into a lower house called the Bundestag and an upper house called the Bundesrat. The Bundesrat is like the U.S. Senate in that members of this house represent one of the 16 federal states, and the Bundestag is like the U.S. House of Congress. To be elected to the Bundestag, a politician must belong to a party that receives at minimum 5% of the national vote and or must win seats in a minimum of 3 districts. This minimum was established to discourage extremist parties, such as the Nazis, from playing an influential role in the political system. Israel: parliamentary, presidential, unitary, unicameral, and non-constitutional. In 1948, Israel declared itself a sovereign state. The state of Israel's executive power is shared by a president as a ceremonial head of state and a prime minister as head of government, both of whom are elected by the one legislative body called the Knesset. Unlike Germany's minimum vote rule of 5%, Israel allows a party to gain a seat if they receive at least 3.25% of the vote. Originally, only 2% was needed, but due to the political instability that resulted, the number was raised to 3.25 in March of 2014. The Prime Minister designate is nominated by the President after he determines which party leader has the support from the majority in the Knesset. Before taking office, the Prime Minister designate must then win a vote of confidence from the Knesset. Like Britain, Israel has no formal constitution. There are laws, including civil rights, that are considered basic to Israel, but despite a variety of proposed constitutions, a constitution has not yet been adopted. God bless.